In 1963, Algeria became an independent country, putting an end to more than 130 years of French colonization and long, burdensome centuries of foreign domination. 10 years after Algeria gained her independence, we went there to observe this young nation and to make a tentative assessment of its collective adventure.
Vous avez défendu la patrie, c'est très bien. Mais maintenant, nous n'avons plus besoin de vous.
Oh donc, ما نحتاجكمش.
Allez-vous-en.
أيوة، زيدوا فيه.
الخبز. C'est une très jolie petite. Mon anana, mon anana, mon anamite.
One of Algeria's greatest writers is Katib Yassine, author of the controversial political play Mohammed, Pack Your Bags, several segments of which we filmed at the Ho Chi Minh Center, a summer camp for war orphans. He agreed to talk with us about the Cultural Revolution in Algeria.
On peut dire qu'il y a eu, avant l'indépendance, un vide.
You can say that before independence, there was a big void in the theater, a void by design. With the coming of independence, we impatiently awaited the fruits of this new theater. We witnessed an explosion of plays, films, books, which are directly linked to the revolution.
The revolution spread through Algeria like wildfire. Two representatives of the National Union of Algerian Women spoke to us about the roles they played during the War of Independence.
My first task was to be the liaison between the National Liberation Front in Algiers and guerrilla group number 1.
Well, to go back a bit, my parents had already been imprisoned. I'd gone home as my commander had told me to do. I found that my parents had already been smoked out, as we'd say during the war.
Once you've been smoked out in the city, you're directed and guided towards the maquis, the guerrillas.
Comrades being looked for in the cities by the French had to take to the hills. Guerrillas gave them instructions and took them higher up. Along the way, they attacked French outposts and convoys. We had to march at night. But, you know, we moved only at night, as the enemy could easily spot us during the day. And it's difficult at night when you're not used to clambering over this sort of terrain.
En avant! L'Albabour!
Now, obviously, just being in Algeria today, in our own land, is for a revolutionary theater a new phenomenon that entails enormous responsibilities. We have completely turned our backs on the official theater, which still has the same very closed-minded audience. Now we're going after a new audience, one like that which you see here, for example. The children of this center are children of the masses. We go into factories too. Yesterday, for example, we put this play on for the workers of a factory. Now there's our audience. Obviously, a people which has suffered greatly has learned a lot and has a lot to say. They're proud of their suffering. The birth of Algeria as a nation is coming true in spite of thousands of obstacles. But we are sure it will come true. Whereas before, 10 years ago, it was still a dream, a utopian dream.
une utopie presque.
Algeria is a country where 60% of the workforce is in agriculture. Recently, she's undertaken a vast plan of agrarian reform in order to industrialize and modernize this important sector of the economy. According to this policy, the workers are charged with managing the collective farms. The government is also trying to group peasants into socialist cooperatives to enable their families to benefit from communal services.
If the farm shows a profit, the workers share in it. That is, profits are shared. The worker has a stake in the farm. The more he produces, the more he earns. The workers they send here are young, 22, 24, 25. They really love the land. Even if you try to put them in industry, I don't think they do much, because they feel comfortable here. They love the sight of the land. I don't know. I'll tell you frankly, I love the land. As they say, you have to love the land for it to give you what you want.
Some widows of the war have been regrouped in an agricultural cooperative. It's not the lure of profit that binds their union, but a common sorrow profoundly shared. A sorrow for those now dead with whom they shared their lives.
أنا نموت والجزائر تحيا.
How do they see the future with the construction of this farming village and the work that goes on here?
ce travail en commun ici. البني هذا اللي يبنيوا فيه ربما ماشيين يعطوكم كل سكنة يبداوا عن تاع ثورة.
قلت لك أنا ساكنة العشش وحنا على القصرية.
She'd like to have a place to live once the people engaged in the agrarian revolution are taken care of. Obviously, she'd like to have a house because she's been living in a shack and her meager income hasn't allowed her to move out of that shack.
Do you think that with their new village she'll have that new apartment?
She hopes so, yes, she hopes so.
That's true cooperation, you see. Help me and I'll help you. That's the idea. And this idea has always existed in this area because when people needed help for some job or other, they'd ask their neighbors for help. And we've followed this policy. Right now, people here get a subsidy of $25 a month, 5 quintals of wheat, 5 kilograms of sugar, oil, and all the necessities of life. It's this which lets them live decently with their families.
Following the massive departure of French teachers, Algeria, newly independent, set up a new educational system which proved highly original and which demonstrated Algeria's will to take its place among the progressive modern nations.
As soon as the schools opened, the teacher training system was set up. The system mobilized every possible local human resource. A small training center was set up in every school, in every little town. Primary school inspectors were called on for this teacher training work on days off. There were courses over radio and television where every resource was mobilized for this high priority task. It happened that one of the editors of a newspaper was a former educational consultant. We quickly arranged with him to have correspondence courses given, not through the mail, as was traditional, but through the newspaper. Every week there was an entire page of the paper where the educational ministries printed everything concerning teacher training. This information was put in the newspaper and instantaneously sent throughout the country. Obviously, you can't educate 700,000 kids with 700 teachers. So Algeria decided to hire what we call monitors. We entrusted primary school kids to these young people who were on the average 18 or 20, who had a primary education, a lot of goodwill, and who were highly motivated, because it really represented a national service.
Just now you said you'd be willing to work anywhere in Algeria, but not abroad. Why?
Because our country is underdeveloped. We want to develop it. We need trained people, engineers.
On va lui faire des cadres, des ingénieurs.
Le niveau de vie matériel de la population en 73.
The standard of living is not higher now than it was in 1963. Nearly all that they get from the sale of oil goes into investment. And that's one of the characteristics of Algerian development. Investment occupies an enormous place in Algeria. It's really a unique case. According to official figures, in 1974, investment should reach 40 to 45% of the gross national product. It's probably the highest percentage in the economic history of the world. Japan, for example, during its most spectacular period of development a few years ago, reinvested on the average 30% of its national income. Here they're investing 45%, thus withdrawing almost half the national income from consumption and transforming it into factories, schools, hospitals, roads. So they must keep a tight rein on consumption, which naturally creates frustration.
More than half the population of Algeria is under 20 years of age. Despite a policy of rapid industrialization, many young workers are unable to find jobs in the country. They are frequently condemned to unemployment or to emigration. In Paris, writer Juliette Mance and Gérard Chalion, former economic advisor to the government of independent Algeria, expressed some of their reservations and objections to the policies of the Boumediene government.
Comme Chalion le disait tout à l'heure, il y a eu une espèce de pari.
The Algerian authorities have made a kind of gamble concerning Algeria's industrialization by industrializing from above, creating key industries, meaning industries employing few workers, but which in the Algerian view will eventually form a capital base which will allow for the creation of new jobs. They said, okay, there's always been unemployment in Algeria. We'll let it continue for another 10 years. There will be great difficulties, and then we'll break through.
Personally, I think that if you compare Algeria with most of the Third World, it's much better off. It's better than either Tunisia or Morocco. It's better than the countries of tropical Africa. It's even better than most Near Eastern countries. There is a very strong nationalism, a desire to nationalize and recover the nation's resources. You can't return to Algeria after 10 years and say that nothing has happened. That's true. But from another angle, people consider that industrialization and the socialist revolution is underway in Algeria. I'm obliged to say that's incorrect, and that industry really affects few sectors. change the lives of few people. It's difficult to talk of socialism in a country where there's at least 1 million unemployed, and where Europe and France, notably, receive between 500,000 and 700,000 workers who come here to work and send money back there.
Mohamed prend ta valise, va nous chercher des devises. Pendant qu'on danse et qu'on se glisse, avec bouillon chez Moretti. Hey! Mohamed prend ta valise, Mohamed prend ta valise. Après 7 ans de durs combats, on a fait...
Nous avons tenu à ancrer notre action dans le monde du travail.
We've decided to root our actions in the workers' world. For example, we perform for workers above all. That's the audience, which is our public, and it's a militant one. There are people who are increasingly conscious of their historic role. The Algerian working class, while Algeria is being built, cannot be left unaware of its historic mission. But it is being destroyed by immigration. It's being destroyed by many other phenomena. It's being pressured by people who are afraid of it, because it's the force of the future. Obviously, the working class is feared by the enemies of the revolution, because when workers ally themselves with artists, it's at that point that thought and action can be reconciled.
Si tu as besoin d'une analyse, tu dois savoir que la devise de l'émigré passe avant lui. J'ai grand besoin de tous ces veaux. Je vends les bras et les cerveaux. Ça me rapporte et tout va bien. Excuse-moi, mademoiselle.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a?
Je suis africaine et je suis perdu.
Mais je m'en fous, ça me fait rien.
Je m'en fous de qu'est-ce que ça veut dire. Wallah ya habibi, اللي ما عنده لسان اش يدير.
Tous ces chômeurs et ces tubards, ils nous rapportent des milliards. Et c'est pour ça qu'on ferme les yeux. Sonnez le sourd. Et donnons-lui quelques francs lourds. Comme ça, il sera toujours un balayeur chez les Roumis.
Il y a eu un creux énorme. Il y a eu une régression considérable.
The Algerian economy experienced a considerable regression after independence due to the loss of nearly all its trained personnel. Fortunately, Algeria has oil, and with this oil base, she can pursue a development strategy, allowing her to develop rapidly. This rapid development is something few third world countries can hope for, in this generation or the next.
In Saïda, in the mountains, women workers participate in the management of a textile factory. They told us how they organize their plant.
You know, tomorrow is the first anniversary of our socialist beginnings. We have basically a socialist management. There's an assembly of workers. There's 18 of them elected by the members. The assembly then chooses 9 workers who are split into 5 groups. The Personnel and Training Committee, the Discipline Committee, the Economics and Finance Committee, the Health and Safety Committee, and the Cultural Committee.
يا المجرب احكي لي خويا احكي لي كيفاش راهو الغواني في الغواني يا المجرب احكي لي خويا احكي لي كيفاش راهو الغواني في الغواني
Algeria poses a new question for the world. Is it possible to follow nationalist, democratizing policies in the context of an authoritarian socialist system? Perhaps Algeria herself is an answer to that question. For us, one thing is certain. Algerians display incomparable pride and dignity. In this respect, one can understand how the men and women of this country live in harmony with the nation's collective conscience.
La politisation existe. Politicization exists. It mustn't fall off because it's sort of a motivating force for the individual, the citizen. And this politicization doesn't exist for the same purposes as before. Before, it was for gaining independence, to have our own nation, our flag, etc. Now it's building the country. And if we talk about a revolution, it's because there's still a revolution. There's the agrarian revolution, for example. There's the industrial revolution, the cultural revolution. There are many revolutions.
It is evident that freedom of expression is something we haven't acquired. It is something that must be fought for. It's pointless to think of freedom as something granted once and for all. It's an all-out struggle, whatever form the fight takes. Liberty can be gained only at the price of a never-ending struggle.
Hé, viens, défile avec moi et on te paiera mieux que les rouges. Que faut-il faire? Simplement crier les soviets au poteau. Les soviets au poteau. Les serviettes au poteau. Bravo, camarade. Soviets, pas serviettes. Les serviettes au poteau. Bravo. Faucheton. J'ai crié, paye-moi.
Voilà bien nos petits bourgeois.
Even in a socialist society, I'd say especially in a socialist society, problems never cease, far from it. Life doesn't stop. Far from decreasing, problems multiply, and you mustn't see things too rosy in an abstract way. Problems are never completely solved, and there's always a trend, let's say a trend towards conformity. There's always been this trend in art, no matter what the situation. True artists are always against this, instinctively. Even if they're not politicized, most artists, generally speaking, are on the side of the people.
In fact, democracy exists because things are discussed at the grassroots level, at the level of FLN cells where everyone can participate, even in the most remote mountains or among the nomads. This is especially true in the communes.
He's free to act. He's free to do and say as he pleases. And what's important to him is that now people ask him his opinion, whereas before no one asked him, ever. Now people ask him to attend meetings. They ask him, what do you think about trying this or that crop on your land? That never happened before the revolution.
As they saw that grapes weren't too profitable, they decided to plant themselves some fruit trees.
Who are they who decided?
I mean, according to ministerial directives following national policy, of course, because that was dictated by our national agricultural policy. The committee decided to replace the grapevines with fruit trees.
The council manages this farm, but how does it work with disposition of profits and decisions of what to buy? When there's a profit, for example, is it distributed to the workers or does it go to the government?
Any profit is divided into three parts. One part is put aside for buying new equipment, another part goes to the workers, and the third part is for the social fund.
Emigration has been terrible for the Algerians' image. Sometimes you get the impression people have it in for Algerians. That's my personal opinion. Everywhere they say, an Arab, what's that? Especially an Algerian. That's worse than all the other Arabs. That's the feeling I encounter when I'm in Europe. You tell someone you're an Algerian and right away he thinks you'll give him the plague.
C'est moi, le nègre et le bicot. Qui peint les îles noires? Je suis noir. Nous sommes tous noirs. Je vois tout en noir. Nous broyons du noir. Nous crachons noir.
Vous voyez que, à l'heure actuelle, pour nous, ça a tellement...
You know, right now for us, just the fact of being on our national soil, building a country from scratch, causes 1,000 problems at once. For example, there, you see, we're speaking French. You come from Canada, you're in North Africa. Seemingly, this thread of language that binds you and me was destined to divide us. French was imposed here, the better to dominate our people, strip us of our personality, Frenchify us in the worst sense of the word. Well, the French language survived this massacre. Now, it enables an Algerian to talk with a Canadian from Quebec about his own national independence, which proves that a language can't be used against a people. There it is, culture potentially used as a weapon. But you see how a weapon can be used for things it wasn't intended for.
En France, il y a le PDG. Et pour mater les enragés, il y a les flics et les soldats.
En Gondori, on fait bien mieux. On a coupé la poire en deux.
Il y a le directeur et le président. هذا حكم الديركتور والبريزيدان عليه النور. هذه بلاد القندور ما بقى لنا غير البابور. محمد برونتافاليز محمد برونتافاليز.
Moi, je pense que la similitude la plus marquante qu'on peut trouver entre l'Algérie et le Québec.
I think the most marked similarity you find between Algeria and Quebec, for example, is the effect of ancient traumas. For Algeria, it was a colonization. For Quebec, the conquest, which marked their personalities with a reluctance to take risks, which resulted in personalities with a certain propensity for conservatism, or, at any rate, withdrawal, which probably explains, for example, why Quebec, French Canadians, whatever their level of education, whatever their technical competence, have had relatively little impact on economic decision-making. But I think that sort of thing will be resolved when a future generation makes up its mind to begin the adventure. When the adventure begins, it brings about a change in personality, and problems that appeared insoluble will later on be resolved automatically.
When we think of our Quebec friends, the young people of Quebec in particular, when we think of these youngsters who are engaged in the same kind of struggle as we were, when we think of these youngsters who are humiliated, who are stifled to the point of oppression, we can't help being one with them. We are one with them.
كيفاش راهو الغواني بالغواني يا المجرب احكي لي خويا احكي لي كيفاش راهو الغواني او الغواني